When my sister told me I was nothing but a burden in front of our parents and neighbors, I didn't argue. I picked up my wine glass, smiled, and walked away. That was the last time I ever let her humiliate me. And trust me, she had no idea what was coming. By the time dessert hit the table, the first crack in our family had already formed. You'll hear every word of what she said that night. If you've ever been pushed aside by the people you sacrificed everything for, stay here with me. Hit subscribe so you don't miss a single second of this. Because before that anniversary dinner was over, I realized something. Family doesn't break you by accident. They do it when they think you'll never leave. And that night, I proved them wrong. I never imagined my sister would humiliate me in front of our entire family. Not on this night. Not in front of everyone. It was supposed to be a celebration. My parents' 40th anniversary. Their house in Austin smelled like roasted chicken and apple pie, the kind of scent that always used to feel like home. I'd spent the entire day baking a rose petal cake, the kind that reminded Mom of the flowers I used to sell back when I owned Bloom & Grace. I wanted it to be perfect. I wanted, maybe foolishly, to feel like family again. The dining room was crowded. Neighbors, old family friends, even Diane Miller from across the street, who never missed an excuse to gossip. Laughter filled the air, wine glasses clinked, and for a moment, I almost believed we were normal. Then Amber leaned back in her chair. My little sister. 30 years old and still with that sharp, mocking smile that could slice through bone. She didn't even look at me when she spoke. "Erica," she said, loud enough for every fork to stop midair, "you're holding us back. We'd be better off without you." The words hit like a punch. I froze, the cake server in my hand trembling slightly. No one moved. No one said a damn thing. Dad, Richard Collins, sat at the head of the table, sipping his wine, his expression as blank as ever. Mom's fork hovered, just inches from her plate, her face pale, eyes darting between us but never landing on me. And Diane? I swear I saw her smirk, already filing the moment away for tomorrow's neighborhood gossip. Heat burned in my chest, but I forced myself to smile. I didn't cry. I wouldn't give Amber that satisfaction. I set the cake down carefully, like nothing had happened, and picked up my glass of wine. The bitter taste matched the knot in my throat. No one defended me, not Dad, not Mom, not anyone. I looked at Amber, and for the first time, I saw her not as the girl who used to follow me around the backyard, begging to help arrange flowers, but as someone entirely different. Someone who wanted me gone. I didn't argue, I didn't yell. I simply stood, pushed my chair back, and said softly, "Excuse me." I walked out. Behind me, the room stayed silent. Not a single word followed. In my old bedroom, the one I'd moved back into 5 years ago after selling my shop to help Mom and Dad pay off their debts, I stared at the walls that used to comfort me and now only felt suffocating. 5 years. 5 years of paying their mortgage, their utilities, their taxes. Nearly $2,000 a month. I'd traded my dreams for theirs. Thinking one day they'd see it. Thinking it mattered. But tonight told me everything I needed to know. I packed one suitcase, just clothes, my laptop, and a few photographs from Bloom & Grace. My life before I became the family's invisible lifeline. As I closed the zipper, I could hear laughter faintly drifting down the hall, as if my absence didn't matter. Maybe it never did. I didn't slam the door. I didn't even say goodbye. I walked down the back steps, my heels quiet against the worn wood, and stepped out into the cool Texas night. The air felt different. Cold, sharp, but honest. By the time I reached my car, I had already made up my mind. I wouldn't cry. Not for them. I drove 10 miles to a cheap motel off the highway. The neon sign flickered like it was barely hanging on. But it didn't matter. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was suffocating. Lying in that stiff motel bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, the silence was deafening. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Texts from Mom, missed calls from Amber. I didn't answer. Instead, I thought about everything I'd given them. The shop I sold, the bills I paid, the life I'd sacrificed. And for what? So my sister could look me in the eye and tell me I was nothing but a burden? So my father could drink his wine and pretend he didn't hear? So my mother could stay silent, too afraid to pick a side? Something inside me shifted. I realized they didn't need me, or maybe they'd convinced themselves they didn't. Fine. If that was what they wanted, I'd give them exactly what they asked for. I rolled over and stared at the dark window, the hum of the air conditioner the only sound in the room. I didn't know exactly how I'd do it yet, but one thing was clear. I was done being their lifeline. Sorry. Next time my sister wanted to see what life without me looked like, she was going to find out, and this time I wasn't coming back. The hum of the motel air conditioner followed me through the night like white noise, drowning out everything I didn't want to feel. By morning, my phone was still buzzing. Missed. Calls from Mom, a string of texts from Amber that read like orders, not apologies. I didn't reply. Instead, I drove across town to Ethan and Hannah's house. When Ethan opened the door, his face tightened with worry. "Erica," he said, pulling me into the kind of hug that made my chest ache. What happened? I didn't break. I couldn't. Not yet. Hannah appeared from the kitchen, her gentle eyes scanning me like she already knew I was carrying something too heavy to put into words. They didn't push. They just sat me at their kitchen table, handed me a cup of coffee, and waited. And so I told them about the dinner, about Amber, about the silence that hurt worse than the words. Hannah's hand brushed mine, soft but firm. "You don't deserve this," she said. Ethan leaned back, his expression turning sharp, like a man fitting puzzle pieces together. "You know," he said, "this reminds me of Edward Hayes." I frowned. Ethan told me about Edward, a man who had carried his grown daughter for years, paying every bill, every debt, until one day she told him she didn't want him around anymore. So he walked away, canceled everything. Within weeks, she came crawling back, but Edward never returned. He built a new life without her. "Sometimes," Ethan said, his voice low, "people don't learn until they feel the weight you've been holding for them." The words sank in. For a moment, I stared at my coffee, the steam curling like a quiet dare. And for the first time since I left that house, I felt something close to clarity. If Amber wanted me gone, I'd give her exactly what she asked for. That night, in Ethan and Hannah's guest room, I opened my laptop. My hands didn't even tremble. I logged into my bank account, the screen glowing in the dark. Line after line of automatic payments stared. Back at me. Electricity. Water, internet, home insurance. Little subscriptions. Amber probably thought magically renewed themselves. $2,000 a month. My fingers hovered over the cancel button, and then I clicked. Electricity. Canceled. Water. Canceled internet. Gone. Insurance. Terminated. Each click felt like cutting a rope I didn't even realize had been strangling me for years. By the time I shut the laptop, I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was calm. The next morning, Amber called. I didn't answer. By the second call, I picked up, just to hear it. "What the hell, Erica? The internet's down. I have work to do, and Mom's freaking out because the power company's sending notices. Turn it back on. Now." Her voice was sharp, commanding, the same tone she used when she wanted me to feel small. I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window at Ethan and Hannah's quiet backyard. "You said you wanted to live without me," I said evenly. "This is what that looks like." "You're overreacting," Amber snapped. "Just stop being dramatic and fix it." I almost laughed. Of course she thought this was about drama. Of course she couldn't see the truth. "I'm done fixing things for you," I told her. "You're 30 years old, Amber. Figure it out." There was silence. Then a bitter, mocking laugh. "No one wants you around, Erica. This is exactly why." She hung up, I stared at the screen for a long moment. My chest burned, but my hands were steady. Hannah walked in just as I set my phone down. "Let me guess," she said softly. "She didn't say thank you." I gave a hollow laugh. Not even close. Ethan folded his arms. "Give it a few days," he said. "They'll feel it." And I believed him. 3 days later, Amber's number flashed across my phone again. This time, she didn't bother with pleasantries. "You think this is funny?" she hissed. "Mom's panicking. Dad's losing his repair orders because there's no Wi-Fi. Just turn it all back on before you embarrass us any more than you already have." Embarrass them. That was what this was about now. Not the money. Not the years I'd sacrificed, just their reputation. "Handle your own bills, Amber," I said, my voice cold. "You're selfish," she spat. "You've always been jealous of me." Jealous? I hung up. I didn't shout. I didn't even let it sting. I just ended the call and blocked her number. But that night, lying in the quiet guest room, I stared at the ceiling and thought about Mom. About how she hadn't defended me, about how she'd sat there, letting Amber speak for all of them. And for one fragile second, I almost reached for my phone. But then I remembered Ethan's words. Sometimes, people have to feel the weight, so I left it where it was. The next morning, Mom called. I didn't answer. Instead, I let her voicemail play. "Sweetheart, please, we can't keep up without you. The water bill, the power, Rebecca's, Amber's, and struggling. Just come home." Her voice cracked. I closed my eyes, and for the first time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt resolve. If they wanted to live without me, then they'd better learn how. And something told me this was only the beginning. 3 days after I cut the last payment, silence finally fell over my phone. It wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that comes before a storm. I was sitting at Ethan and Hannah's kitchen table when the call came. Amber. I let it ring once, twice, and then I answered, just to hear it. "What?" "The hell did you do?" Her voice was sharp, high-pitched with panic. "The internet's out. I can't submit my freelance jobs." Mom's freaking out, and the power company just sent a shut-off notice. "You can't do this to us." I leaned back in my chair, my coffee cooling between my hands. "I didn't do this to you," I said calmly. "You wanted to live without me. Congratulations, you're getting exactly what you asked for." "You're insane," she snapped. "Just flip it back on and stop acting like you're the victim." I almost laughed. Amber always had a gift for twisting reality until I wondered if maybe I was the crazy one. "Not anymore." "No," I told her. "Not this time." There was a beat of silence. Then she laughed, sharp and cruel. "You're so sensitive. This is why no one wants you around." And she hung up. I stared at the phone for a long time, my chest tight, but steady. Hannah, who'd been chopping vegetables nearby, glanced up. "She's unraveling," she said softly. Ethan smirked without humor. "Give it a week. They'll break before she does." But it didn't take a week. By the next day, Mom's voice filled my voicemail, trembling, pleading. "Sweetheart, please. The house is falling apart. Amber can't work. Your dad can't get mower orders without Wi-Fi. Just help us, Erica. Your family." Family. I closed my eyes and pictured her sitting in the living room, wringing her hands like she always did when things got bad. And for a second, I felt that familiar ache, that pull. But then I remembered Amber's words. "No one wants you around." Press delete. The darkness was spreading, literally. By day 4, Diane Miller texted me a single line. "Everything okay over there? Heard some things?" I didn't reply, but I knew exactly what she'd heard. By day 5, Amber was calling from different numbers, blocked each one. On day 6, Mom showed up at Ethan and Hannah's. When Hannah opened the door, Mom looked smaller somehow. Her shoulders hunched, her face pale and drawn. She clutched her purse like it was a lifeline. "Erica," she whispered. "Please, the bank, we're behind on payments. Amber's trying to borrow money from Diane. Your father, he's lost without you. I stood in the doorway, my hand gripping the frame. Mom, I said, steady but cold. Amber told me, you'd all be better off without me. You didn't disagree. She didn't mean it, Mom pleaded. You know how she gets when she's angry. Please, just come home. We'll fix this. I'll talk to her. No, I said. This isn't just Amber. You sat there. Dad sat there. None of you said a word. You made your choice. Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't want to lose both of you. For a split second, I wanted to reach for her, but I didn't. Instead, I closed the door. And then it happened. That night, Diane sent me a video. It was shaky phone footage taken from across the street. The Collins house, dark except for one dim lamp in the living room. Amber was on the porch, screaming into her phone while Mom stood behind her, looking exhausted and small. A few neighbors, Robert and Ellen from across the street, were watching from their yard, whispering, the caption, Diane. Added made my stomach twist. Never thought I'd see the Collins family like this. And just like that, the gossip began to spread. The next morning, Amber called again from an unknown number. I answered. Are you enjoying this? She spat. Diane's telling everyone. Do you know how embarrassing this is? I smiled, not because I was happy. God, no, but because for once the weight wasn't mine. You said you wanted to live without me, I reminded her. Now you're getting the chance. Don't you dare talk down to me, she screamed. You think you're better than us? You're pathetic, Erica. Then came the sound of glass shattering in the background, Mom's voice shouting her name. And in that moment, I realized something. Amber wasn't angry because I left. She was angry because for the first time in her life, she was feeling the consequences of her own choices. That night, I lay in Ethan and Hannah's guest room, staring at the ceiling. No phone, no noise, just silence. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was drowning in it. I closed my eyes, and a small smile crept across my face. This wasn't revenge, this was freedom, and the darkness was only the beginning. The storm finally broke. It started with Diane Miller. Late one evening, she sent me another video. This one clearer than the last. Amber stood on our porch under the harsh glow of a single flickering light, her hair a mess, her voice sharp enough to slice through the quiet neighborhood. You think this is funny? She shouted at Diane, who was filming from across the street. Mind your own damn business! Mom hovered behind her like a ghost, wringing her hands, her face pale. I didn't press play twice. I didn't need to. The image was already burned into my mind. By morning, half the neighborhood had seen it. The Collins family, our family, had become gossip, and I wasn't there to stop it. That night, a knock came at Ethan and Hannah's door. Hannah glanced at me from the kitchen. Are you expecting anyone? I wasn't. When I opened the door, Mom stood there. She looked smaller than I remembered, her shoulders curved inward, her hands clutching her purse like it might keep her from falling apart. Erica, she whispered, please, we need to talk. Ethan appeared behind me, but I held up a hand. This was mine. I let her in. She sat on the edge of the couch, her fingers twisting the strap of her purse, her eyes darting everywhere but my face. The bank is threatening foreclosure, she said, her voice trembling. Amber's working nights at the supermarket, your father's trying, but nothing's enough. I'm begging you, Erica, just help us. One last time. For a moment, I just stared at her. The mother who'd watched me give up my business, my independence, 5 years of my life, just so she and Dad wouldn't lose that house. The same woman who sat silent while Amber called me a burden. I should have felt angry, but instead, all I felt was tired. Mom, I said quietly. I paid for everything. I kept that house standing when it should have fallen years ago. And when Amber humiliated me at that table, you didn't say a word. Her chin trembled. I was scared. I didn't want to lose her. And you lost me instead. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't argue. "She's your sister," Mom whispered. "She's hurting. Can't you just put it behind you? Just until things get better?" I leaned forward, my voice steady, each word cutting like glass. "I'm not fixing this for her, not anymore. She wanted me gone, and you—" I swallowed hard. "You let her speak for you." Mom flinched but didn't deny it. From the doorway, Ethan crossed his arms, silent but solid. Hannah stayed near the kitchen, her gaze soft, steady, like she was holding me up without saying a word. Mom's tears spilled, her voice barely audible. "I just don't know how to hold this family together anymore." For a brief second, I wanted to reach out and take her hand, but I didn't, because that wasn't my job anymore. "I'm sorry," I said, and for the first time, I meant it, not for her, but for me. Her shoulders sagged. She stood slowly, like the weight of the entire house she was losing was pressing down on her. "Your father?" she began, but her voice cracked and she stopped. When she left, the silence in the room was heavy. Ethan placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. I wanted to believe him. The next night, Richard showed up. Not Mom. Not Amber Richard. He didn't look angry. He didn't even look ashamed. He just stood there at Ethan and Hannah's door, his hands shoved in his pockets like he was about to ask for a cup of sugar. "Erica," he said flatly. "Your mother's worried sick. We need the money for the bills. If you could just—" "No," I cut in. He blinked as if he hadn't even considered that I might say it. "You don't understand," he said. "Amber's doing her best, but she can't—" "Amber told me to disappear," I said sharply. "And you sat there. You didn't stop her. You didn't stop anything." His jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. "I'm not saving you anymore, Dad." For a moment, he just stared at me. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. I shut the door, and I didn't cry. The next day, Diane sent me one last message, a photo of Amber arguing with Robert and Ellen Parker on the front lawn. The caption read, "This neighborhood has never seen anything like this." I stared at it for a long moment. Then I set my phone down and laughed, quiet, almost disbelieving. Amber had wanted a life without me, and she was getting it. The best part? This was only the beginning, because for the first time in years, I wasn't the one drowning. They were, and I was finally breathing. 3 months. That's how long it took for the house I grew up in to finally break under the weight I'd been carrying alone for years. I heard it first from Diane Miller, of course. She sent me a photo, the Collins house, our house, its yard overgrown, paint chipping, and a large red and white for sale sign planted in the front lawn. Underneath her text, "Never thought I'd see this day." I stared at the screen for a long time, not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. Amber, Mom, and Dad had moved into a small one-bedroom apartment on the edge of Austin. Diane said she saw them leaving. Boxes piled high in the back of a pickup truck, Amber's face set in a grim scowl, Mom crying quietly in the passenger seat. I didn't go. I didn't even drive by. For the first time in years, their chaos wasn't my problem anymore. Instead, I stood in my new condo, small but mine, and sipped my coffee while sunlight spilled across the hardwood floors. The walls were still bare, but I'd hung one thing already, a framed blueprint for Bloom and Grace. I was opening it again. A second chance. My chance. Ethan and Hannah had been there every step of the way. They came over that afternoon with takeout and a bottle of champagne. Hannah hugging me so tightly I almost forgot how heavy my chest had felt just months before. "You did it," she whispered, and for the first time, I believed her. But even in that quiet, with the hum of new beginnings all around me, there was one thing left, a letter. It came 2 days after the move. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. I recognized it instantly. Amber. I sat at my kitchen counter for a long time, staring at it. Part of me didn't want to open it. Part of me didn't want to give her that power, but I did. "Erica," it began. "I'm sorry. For what I said, for what I did. I was angry, and I didn't realize how much you did for us. I know it's late, but I hope. Maybe one day? We can talk." I read it twice. No mention of Mom, no mention of Dad, no promise to change. Just words. I folded the letter and tucked it into a drawer with old photographs I hadn't looked at in years. I didn't write back. That night, Diane called. "Did you see the Parkers' faces when your sister walked past?" If I didn't know any better, I'd say Karma's finally on vacation. I laughed. A real laugh. Not bitter, not sharp, just light. The next morning, I hung the sign. Grand opening. Bloom and grace. The shop wasn't big, it didn't have to be. Sunlight poured through the front windows, spilling over buckets of fresh roses and peonies. I stood there in the quiet, running my fingers over a stack of order slips, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was living in someone else's shadow. When I flipped the open sign, Ethan and Hannah were the first to walk in. Diane came too, carrying her phone like she was ready to broadcast this to the entire neighborhood. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her. Amber. She didn't come inside. She just stood across the street watching. For one small strange moment, I almost expected her to wave, to shout, to do something reckless and loud, the way she always had. But she didn't. She just stood there, clutching her bag, her eyes fixed on me through the glass. And I smiled. Not for her, but for me. Because I didn't need her apology. I didn't need any of them. For the first time, I had my life back. She turned away eventually, disappearing down the sidewalk, and I didn't chase her. That night, I sat by the window of my new condo, city lights glittering below me, and I thought about everything. The dinner table, the silence, the moment I walked out that back door, and I realized something I'd never let myself believe until now. Family isn't blood, it's respect, it's choice. And if you have to burn the bridge to save yourself, sometimes that's the only way to stop drowning. I turned off my phone. Amber's number was still blocked, and as I leaned back in my chair, a strange peace settled over me. I wasn't their lifeline anymore. I was mine, and for the first time, that was enough. I stood there in the quiet of my new shop, the scent of fresh flowers filling the air, and for the first time in years, there was no weight pressing on my chest. Just stillness. It felt strange, almost fragile, like if I moved too fast, it might break. But then the ache crept in, the one I'd been holding off for months, the kind you only feel when the noise fades and you're left alone with the truth. I thought about my mother's voice, soft and pleading. I thought about Amber standing across the street, watching me through the window. And for a moment, I wondered if any of them realized what they'd lost. Still, I didn't regret walking away. Sometimes peace doesn't come with answers. It comes when you stop bleeding for people who never noticed the cuts. And in that quiet, I finally found enough strength to breathe. Maybe one day I'll look back without the sting. Maybe. But right now, this is enough. This new space. This new life. Me. Because what I've learned is simple. You don't get to keep giving yourself away to stay in a family. You choose yourself first, or you disappear. If you've ever had to choose peace over family, tell me in the comments. I read every word. And maybe someday I'll wonder if I could forgive them. But tonight, I just want to sit here in the glow of this new beginning and remember what it feels like to finally be free.